All right. Looks like it is 2 o'clock on the dot, and we are very mindful of your time. So hopefully everyone can hear me. You all are doing good today. Happy Friday, all of that good stuff. So happy to see all of you online on this Friday afternoon. We thank you for joining us in this series. Today we will be doing the Service Excellence series, continuing this series and talking about tact and diplomacy. So here today we have on the call myself, that's Teresa Harris. We have Dr. Catherine Oliveras, Dr. Chantel Blake, Dr. Patty Young, Laura Flores, who provided content, and Dr. Solomon Tension. So I wanted to also provide a reminder to some of the things that we've talked about in this customer service series. And as we talk, we've talked about being professional, having that sense of urgency, being student-centered, and always, always having helpful actions. I want you all to remember that as we navigate through this series, as we continue to navigate through this series. So today it is part 3, the art of civility, communicating with tact and diplomacy. We know that communicating is an art. There are many tools available. You just need to have purpose when you're using communication. Words are very powerful. In part 3, today, you will learn more about tact and diplomacy and use tools to assist you in communicating more effectively with others. When using some of the methods we will discuss here today, you will be sure to improve your relationships and empowering you to have more successes when you communicate difficult information to different people or various people in different situations. At the heart of tact and diplomacy, there is a mutual respect and understanding for what others might feel and acknowledge that their experiences are indeed real. How many of you have ever tried to hide your feelings? All of us, right? All of us. So I want you to think about that as we navigate through this particular series today. So as we begin, we want to define what tact is, and Dr. Chantel Blake will be presenting that for us.
Thank you so much, Ms. Harris. Did you know that how well we communicate can make or break the professional image of our institution? And the manner in which you individually communicate also directly influences how others view your work performance, as well as your prospects for career advancement and mobility. Unfortunately, being tactful and diplomatic does not always come naturally, but fortunately, it can be developed and learned. To be a communicator who's skilled in tact and diplomacy, it takes an awareness and a know-how to apply proven communication techniques. At the conclusion of this 1-hour intensive training, you will be equipped with the skills needed to be more diplomatic and tactful when communicating. So let's begin with what is tact? The American Management Association defines tact as having careful consideration in dealing with others and avoiding giving offense. Tact involves the ability to clearly and effectively both receive and transmit information, ideas, thoughts, feelings, and needs in a conflict-free manner. When dealing with students, we bear the responsibility of guiding and handling the interaction with authentic care and tact. Let's bring our attention to the cartoon on the slide. This is a secret family recipe. Speaking of family secrets, you were adopted. Well, I wonder if there was a better way to deliver that information.
Well, you didn't say it was adopted.
Yes, because it's easy to be careless with the words we choose. We must remember that words are powerful. Words can be helpful or hurtful, and words can have a direct influence on the outcome of a situation, creating either a positive or negative conclusion. Words define our identity and reveal our attitudes. They also reflect who we are. Our choice of words provides students and colleagues an indication of our experience and intention. The problem is, once words exit our mouth, no number of apologies will make them magically go back in. It's like shutting the gate after the horse has bolted. On the other hand, thinking before we speak allows us the time to consider the effect of the words we're choosing. When you choose not to think before you speak, you're more likely to give offense, even if your intentions were genuinely intended to be helpful. Thinking before we speak assists us in becoming more tactful and also teaches us how to offset negativity with positivity. While speaking may seem to happen without a lot of thought because it occurs so quickly, psycholinguistic research has shown that we actually do plan our speech in different ways and we do think in advance to various degrees, of course. As such, we are not doomed to say the first thing that enters our heads. We actually do have the ability to control what we say. And it starts with really listening and comprehending, and then only talking after carefully thinking. We must think, what are the customer's needs? What is the desired intention of this interaction? And if you are unsure of what the customer is desiring as a result of the interaction, it's okay to ask questions. However, for you, the intention is always clear to serve customers, internal and external, efficiently, completely, in a tactful manner. So we talk after carefully thinking. At this point, you may be wondering, how specifically do we develop tactile interactions? What are the factors to consider? Step by step, what can I do to ensure that all of my interactions are tactful? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let us review our simple 3 steps. Oh, but wait. Okay, before we go over 3 steps, if you bring attention to the slide, you'll see that there are some elements from previous trainings. That's because providing authentic care is not random. It's a proven formula that if we all followed, we would get the same results. Just like when you're invited over to a friend's home for dinner and experience a fabulous dish, you want that recipe. Well, consider what you learned today, ingredients for the recipe of authentic care. And sometimes, as we know, you have to cook that dish a little more than once to perfect it. Therefore, please indulge me as I go into the steps, which include elements from previous training. Here we go. Step 1. One characteristic of successful communicators when exercising tact is they can overcome communication roadblocks as listed on the slide. Roadblocks to good communication can occur anywhere in the communication process. Good communicators are successful at overcoming these roadblocks. They don't quit. When confronted with a roadblock, a good communicator will search out alternative ways to achieve their purpose. Overcoming communication roadblocks is the first step to becoming a tactful communicator. Step 2, understanding verbal and nonverbal cues. In some research findings, verbal cues accounted for 35 to 40% of the impact of a message. There are 4 elements involved in tactful vocal communication. Speed of voice. Problems arise when there's significant discrepancy in vocal speed between 2 speakers. Consider adjusting your speed, especially when it's time for you to de-escalate. Next, let's talk about volume. People with deep voices are generally perceived as more persuasive than those with voices that are relatively high. This is true for women as well as men. Consider lowering your pitch when you want to have a positive impact. Inflection. Inflection is the emphasis you place on certain words when you're speaking, and it tells others how you feel about what you're saying. A powerful message without the proper inflection can lose its impact for the customer. For example, I didn't say you were crazy. I didn't say you were crazy. I didn't say you was crazy. Often it's not what you say, but it's how you say it. And I hope that example helped with that. Tone addresses the character of emphasis used. Angry, sad, sincere, sarcastic. People actually pay more attention to the tone in which you say something rather than what you're actually saying. So please be sure to watch your tone when communicating tactfully with others. And step 3, last but certainly not least, Listening matters. Listening and responding effectively to someone else's statement is a critical part of communication. When you actively listen, the person receiving the message feels important, recognized, and accepted. Good listening can have a huge impact on increasing tact and improving the ways that others perceive you. We always want to determine a common interest between ourselves and our customers. And in our business, it's education. We want to evaluate what our what the other person is saying, not pretty much not how they're saying it. We don't want to get caught up in the delivery, but listen actively to the need. And we want to keep the main thing the main thing. And the main thing is serving the student in a in a matter which has no conflict. Dr. Oliveras will go deeper into active listening momentarily. So let's transition, if we can, into diplomacy.
Dr. Blake,
Yes.
I like this. Keep the main thing the main thing. You know I'm going to remember that, right? Here we go.
Good. So diplomacy. Diplomacy is having the ability to subtly and skillfully handle situations. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the what and why of diplomacy and why it's so important. Diplomacy is the mechanism used to enhance and strengthen relationships within the workplace and decrease negative emotional impact upon delivery of any kind of unfavorable news or feedback. So that's the what. And the why. The DCCD mission is the why. Why diplomacy? Because positive relationships are the foundation of how we achieve our mission. And as we all know, our mission at DCCD is to transform lives and communities through higher education. Managing relationships is the basis of diplomacy. So I'm sure you're wondering, how can we be more diplomatic? A few simple ways to be more diplomatic. Of course, we want to listen and be understanding and be present, okay? Avoid negative words, and we're going to go into a little talk about that in a second. We're going to say the magic word, sorry. We're going to soften our statements and do our best to avoid finger pointing statements with the word you. So now, let's apply this information. Possibly, instead of saying this, we can say that, all right? Instead of saying this, you are not understanding me. You can say that, sorry, perhaps I'm not making myself clear. I specifically mean, instead of saying this, what in the world are you talking about? You can say that, thank you for sharing. Can you please help me understand? Instead of saying this, you need to stop. You can say that, would it be possible to please refrain from? I hope you get the gist of that. Okay. I hope this discussion on tact and diplomacy has assisted you in recognizing the value of these two key communication skills. We always want to align our impact with our intentions, and we know our intention is to serve. We want to be present, and if we're not sure what the intention is, we need to ask for feedback in a kind and compassionate way. Please remember, without tact and diplomacy, we lose work, we lose relationships, we lose recognition, we lose respect, and most of all, we lose the opportunity to transform lives by losing students. Going forward, instead of tact and diplomacy being nouns, let's use them as verbs. Thank you for allowing me to share.
Thank you so much, Dr. Blake, for providing that introduction to diplomacy and tact. So I want to pause for a minute and ask you all a question, and that is, what are situations you can think of where tact and diplomacy are paramount? What are some situations that you can think of where tact and diplomacy are paramount? I would like for you to use the chat box and to begin to chat those responses in. I'm interested to know some situations you believe that tact and diplomacy are paramount. Frustrated students, yes. Absolutely. Disappointed students, going over suspension. All these difficult conversations that we must have with students. Financial barriers, process barriers. Thank you guys for providing those responses. Hardships or disabilities, keep them coming so we can see them. Thank you. So I would like for you all to think about this as we talk about tact. What are some strategies we can use to make the statements below more tactful? So instead of saying your fragrance is too strong, right? Think about how you can rephrase that. And then B, where is the data I asked you for? How can we rephrase that so that we're more tactful with our conversations? That's A, your fragrance is too strong, and B, where is the data I asked you for? And really, with both of these, the tone matters. Were you able to collect the data I requested? That's a good one. Wanted to know if you had fragrance on today. When students are found with unauthoritative materials while testing. Okay. We're getting in a bunch of different things in the chat box. I am checking back with you regarding the data that we discussed. Very good responses. And so just by changing the tone and the manner in which this information was delivered, we're able to probably, in many instances, have a different conversation with people. So now we want to move to active listening. Presenting this section is Dr. Catherine Oliveris.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to join you today to discuss active listening. So as Dr. Blake mentioned, before you can respond tactfully and thus diplomatically, you should make sure that you've been listening, right? It's not just passively engaging with the conversation that someone's been having with you or the customer you're attending to, but really actively listening and ready to engage with them after you've heard what they have said. So what is active listening? Active listening means you're focused completely on the person speaking. You're giving them your full attention. There are no distractions, no phones, nothing else. You're fully attentive to that person. And you're not just hearing what they have to say, but you're actually listening to the words they're saying, right? You're actually listening to what they're telling you and focused on what that is that they're saying. So as Dr. Blake mentioned, there are some nonverbal cues that help you attend to active listening, such as smiling, posture, eye contact. I know in a virtual environment, that's a little harder to gauge some of these nonverbal cues, especially if you're not in a virtual session like this where you could possibly see the other person, right? But you do still have to pay attention to the pauses, right? Do you hear the sighs or things like that, those kind of nonverbal things? And then verbally, what questions are you asking the person about what they said? Are you seeking clarity? Are you summarizing, right? Which kind of goes into some of the things that we're going to talk about. So what I wanted to do was really provide you all some tips and tools that are going to be really useful to you later on to kind of go back to and reference. And in doing so, I found some information from the Center for Creative Leadership that really took active listening skills and put it in kind of a 6-step thing here about what are 6 steps to active listening or the 6 things that you need to know for active listening. And I think that's a really digestible way to have a lot of this information presented to you. So the first one is to pay attention. Like we said, pay attention. And paying attention isn't just putting away things. It's also about your body language, right? Like when we do return to a face-to-face environment, what's your body language like when you're with your students and other people to let them know that you're paying attention to them, right? Are you leaning in? Are you smiling? Are you changing your facial expressions based on what someone is telling you, right? Are your you're really engaged in that manner when you see that and when you're paying attention. And don't forget that even if you're not face to face, when you're speaking to someone over the phone, it's clear if you are listening or you're not listening to someone, and if you're paying attention to that particular conversation. The second skill is to withhold judgment, right? Don't judge the speaker or whomever you're with. Keep an open mind and have empathy for them and try to take perspective. Now, it's not just about you responding in a tone, right? Because you're receiving the information for someone, and for that information to then you're now responding to it in a way that you want to make sure that person receives it well. So don't respond to them based on their tone, right? The key to being a good customer service professional and the key to active listening is that you're seeing beyond the tone. You get it. You know that there's a certain tone in what they're saying, but you're seeing beyond that, right? And you're not passing judgment on it, but rather attending to what's being said by the speaker. And then the third thing is to reflect. And this is really important. While you're listening, again, you don't want to become distracted by what they say, but you want to listen to what they're saying and reflect actively on what they're saying, which means that you now paraphrase. As someone takes a pause in the conversation and are waiting for you to respond, you're paraphrasing what's been said to that person. You hear what they're saying about this issue and you listen to what they're saying. And in paraphrasing, you're confirming with them what it is that's been said to also check for your own understanding in that conversation. And that's really important to make sure that your active listening skills are in place, but also for the person who's speaking to you to know that they've been listened to.
So, Catherine, I think my husband needs to listen to this slide in particular, right? So, when you talk about this, are you hearing or are you listening, right? We have those conversations with our spouses. And so I'm so happy in the way that you put that information. It's more digestible, and I will certainly pass that along. Thank you.
You're welcome. It is certainly helpful in relationships. And then next, the fourth thing you want to do is you want to clarify, right? And so this is, again, beyond paraphrasing, you're asking for questions that help you to clarify what the speaker means when they say something. For example, when you're listening to someone speak with you about their issue, if you don't follow what they're saying, you should state, I don't think I'm following you. What do you mean by X, Y, and Z? Right? Some of the stuff that Dr. Blake was even pointing to you in this instead of that kind of way, right? One, by doing it that way, you are showing that you're listening to what they're saying. And also, when you're asking these questions, you want to also use language to evoke more than a yes or no answer in a response, which is also telling about how much you're paying attention to that conversation. Because if you're just asking yes or no questions, that evokes a different response than saying, tell me about your situation. Could you explain why X, Y, and Z? Or how do you know that A, B, C, D happened, right? And so those are really important things. It lets the the person who is speaking, it lets them know that you've been listening and that you want additional information and that you care, right? The next thing, number 5, you're going to summarize, right? And again, summarizing, yes, it's beyond repeating in a question format. And in summarizing, that's where you go just full beyond paraphrasing. You're full beyond clarifying. In the summarizing portion, you've spent time reflecting, you've asked deeper questions, and you're demonstrating that you've understood the message the speaker was trying to convey. And let's say you have a student who's speaking to you about their desire to enroll in full-time classes. You want to say something like, well, let me be sure I understand your situation correctly. You want to enroll full-time at one of our colleges, and you last enrolled with us, yada, 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 and you continue that. So and in the summarization, it's not just checking for clarity and paraphrasing or repeating back to someone what they've said. It's really about letting them know that you understand the situation. It's helping you continue to make those connections for them, and you're putting it together also to let them verify for you, right? You're letting the person who is sharing with you their information as a customer verify that you have the right idea and that you can continue to provide them additional assistance, right? Because that's what's really important. Are you hearing what they've said, or are you actually listening to the words that they're providing and what it is they're telling you about their story? And that really allows for the person who's talking to you, that customer, know that you're really engaged with them and that you care and you want to continue to help them. And then the last thing in active listening is to share. Now that you've been listening and you've verified with the speaker what you've understood from their words is correct, you can now share your assistance and your guidance and resources with this person that you've been listening to, because you've sought first to listen and now you're providing that feedback and guidance to them. And what this really does for us is kind of evoke the sentiment from the very first student customer service training we did, right? Where I believe it was Laura that said that we need to wait, right? Sometimes we just need to wait. Ask ourselves, why am I talking? And this is imperative for active listening. I think our first instinct sometimes when we get students in or even colleagues in that we know that they have issues, our first instinct is to maybe go to solve or try to help and provide that feedback right away, when in reality we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, why am I talking in this moment? And is it really necessary? Because truly, as an active listener, again, you seek first to understand what's at hand, and then you go to providing those assistance and resources that's needed in order to help your customer, your student, whoever that might be. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. We appreciate you so much for providing all of that information on active listening. And I promise I myself will use these tools to become a better listener. So we move forward with Dr. Patty Young, who will be spending some time talking about communicating and responding with grace using various techniques.
All right. Well, thank you, Teresa. Happy Friday to our group today. As Teresa has already said, I will be focused on communicating and responding with grace. In this statement, I think grace is such an important word. It's such a powerful word that I'd like to spend just a little bit of time just really talking about how do we define grace. As you can see on the screen, I've identified about 3 definitions: a pleasing or attractive quality, excellence of divine origin, a sense of elegance of form, manner, motion, or action. And then some of the words that we associate with grace: decorum, a sense of elegance, sense of finesse, balance, tact, as well as manners. As I think about these definitions and as I think about those words that are associated with grace, it really highlights 2 things for me. The first thing being is that grace is a very personal experience. It's one of those experiences that comes from deep within, is heartfelt. It's an internal reflective process. The second thing that I want to highlight in terms of grace is that it's a practice process, that it's not something that we can just wake up one morning overnight and become very graceful in our presentation, in our communication, in our responses, but it's a process that we practice over and over. And every time we have an opportunity to practice or to encounter, we get better at it. We learn a little bit more as we go along. It's personal from the standpoint that it is framed in a set of values. And I think that that's very important as we think of this. As you'll see, values become part of not only how we respond with grace, but in terms of building relationships as well. So as I go through my presentation, you're going to probably hear quite a bit about values. The first value that I want to highlight, and certainly there are many more that go with grace, but these are just some that I want to highlight today for the purpose of today's presentation. The first one is respect. And that means means respect for ourselves as well as the other person that we're communicating or responding with. We want to present ourselves in a way that we garner respect from that other person. In addition to that, we want to also engage with that person from a very respectful manner as well. The second value is that of trust. We want to enter into that conversation, into that response from a place of trust, convincing the other person that they should trust us, what we're saying. And certainly we want to present ourselves to them as if we trust them as well. And I think we do that by always starting from a place of honesty, making sure that that's part of the forefront of our conversation. But in addition to that, also being willing to speak our truth. I think that that becomes important in the sense that sometimes we have to remember that our truth may not necessarily be the truth of the other person, but that's okay because that's part of diversity. That's part of how we learn. That's part of how we evolve. But as we go into that, understanding that we have to position ourselves so that we are accepting of that person's position or that person's perspective, and that it is okay. So in light of those values, what I like to do right now is just spend some time just talking about some considerations that as you communicate, as you respond, and you want to frame it from these values, from a place of grace, just some things to consider. Here again, I've emphasized the word heartfelt because I think grace comes from deep within. So let's just talk about some of the considerations. The first one is the golden rule. If you were part of the first presentation within the series that I did, I talked about reciprocity, always making sure that we treat people the way we want to be treated. Whenever I'm working with a student, I always imagine that student to be my son, my daughter, and making sure that I treat them the way that I would want someone to treat Mackenzie or to treat Tyler, my son. So I think that becomes very important for us. The other one is to be willing to listen. Catherine has already talked about active listening, and I think that is so important. Because a lot of times when we are engaging in a conversation, it's so easy to get caught up in trying to formulate your next thought as that person is talking versus really just taking a step back and being fully engaged and being fully present, listening to what that person is trying to convey, because that gives us an opportunity to really try and understand their perspective or their point of view. And I think the other thing that we have to always remember, because sometimes when we're dealing with differences in opinion, sometimes we can get pretty emotional about it. And if we're not careful, sometimes those emotions can bleed through and they can supersede the point that we want to make or the point that's important in the conversation. So it's very important that we manage our emotions as well. Some of the other personal considerations is to be mindful of our body language. I'm a type of person, I love to cross my arms. And when I get excited, I have a point to make, I want to start leaning forward in my chair. I have to remember that sometimes that body language can come across as being aggressive. And so I think it's important that while that may not be our intention, it very well could be the perception of the other person on the other side of that conversation. So we have to be mindful of that body language. We also have to be willing to add value to the conversation. And that doesn't mean that sometimes we have to say something just so that we can have something to say, but to be mindful of sometimes it's just a smile that we may give. Sometimes it may be just a kind word that we can add to that conversation, but something that really adds value to that and bring the conversation to another level. The next one is eliminate the need to win. I think as we engage in a conversation, the goal should always be to make sure that we find a resolution that works for all of us. When we enter into the conversation from a competitive standpoint, taking that position that I have to win this conversation, what usually happens is that both people will start to dig their heels into that conversation and they will stay stuck there and nobody moves, which means that there is no progress made in regards to that particular conversation. And then, of course, we have to be mindful about boundaries, to respect as well as accept the boundaries of the other person. Sometimes it's difficult to know where those boundaries are. This is part of that practice activity. The more we're into it, the more we start to figure out those acceptable boundaries and those unacceptable boundaries. And also, I think we can also use reciprocity here. What were your boundaries? And 9 times out of 10, there are other people with that same boundary. So if you're uncertain, ask yourself the question, how would I feel if someone said this to me? Sometimes some things are just not appropriate to say, and we always have to remember that. Now, let's talk a little bit about how do we build rapport? How do we improve relationships? And so to start this conversation, let's just talk about the word rapport. Rapport means to really build those meaningful, effective relationships, to develop those connections. And we do that from a place of trust, so that the individuals, the partners within this relationship, that they feel that they can have fair exchange of thoughts and ideas. And I think that when that occurs, then we create that pathway for those within the relationship to be able to fairly engage with each other. So as we start to build rapport, I think that just like grace, that rapport really comes from a set of values as well. And some of these values are the same, as I mentioned earlier, that we'll go over these values because really all of this is internal. It's coming from that deep place within. We've already talked about that genuine respect, but also that value and that worth to see that other person as being able to add value. We can always learn from each other, and that person can certainly bring something into the relationship. We have to take the opportunity to be willing to look for that. We often sometimes go into a relationship from a negative perspective, but it's very easy to turn that around and find something positive about it because that's when we start to find that value and that worth. Also, engagement and understanding, being willing to engage and to understand differences, that's part of our lives. And so we encounter people from different walks of life, people who may not look like us, people who may have had different experiences. And so we have to be willing to be understanding and be willing to engage with those individuals because I believe that when we engage from a standpoint of diversity, it's an opportunity for growth, it's an opportunity for development, it's an opportunity for involvement. Reciprocity, we've already talked about that. It's that golden rule. Treat people the way you want them to treat you. And then finally, we have to be willing to be open and accepting, especially when we think about it from a diversity standpoint. Just because that person may not see things the way you see them, maybe they've had a different experience, maybe their background is different. I think it's still important that we're open and that we are accepting of those differences because that's part of building that relationship as well. Now, no matter how much we practice grace and no matter how well we have worked to build meaningful relationships, we will always encounter difficult people. And especially in our profession, it's not unusual for us to encounter difficult people, whether they're students, whether parents, whether coworkers. So I think it is important that we understand or at least have some techniques under our belt to help us navigate those situations. One of the things that I've learned, and I learned this a long time ago, that whenever there's a difficult person, a difficult student that we're dealing with, to give that student an opportunity to really take a breath, just to breathe just for a moment, maybe in a very caring or compassionate way. It may be asking that person to maybe take a seat in this comfortable seat and have a drink of water, just to give them just a moment to breathe. The benefit to that is that not only does it give that person an opportunity to calm down just a little bit, but it also gives me an opportunity to find my own balance and my own center around the situation. And so we both can enter the conversation at a different level, and hopefully that level will give us an opportunity to engage so that we can find a resolution to that person's situation. There again, it's so important that we always display the fact that we care and that we really want to help that person work through the situation, that we come from a place of compassion and a place of concern, as well as a place of respect. The other thing that I think is important, going the extra mile. How can we show this person that really we're going to really give them more than what they came expecting? Doesn't mean that we have to bend over backwards to maybe give a yes to a no answer that's really out of the question, but it just means that we are willing to give that person just a little bit more than they were expecting. Maybe it's a little bit more kindness, maybe it's a little bit more compassion, but just to give them a little bit more. Normally if a person is standing in front of you and they are, and they're frustrated, overwhelmed, but they're coming from a negative place, the reason that they're standing in front of you is because they believe that your responsibilities within your position, your job, that they relate to whatever it is they're trying to work out. And so, and 9 times out of 10, that is probably true. And so we have to make sure that our job responsibilities, that we've learned them very well so that we can give that best service, that quality service to that student, and that we know our institutions very well, that we know the resources, we know the offices, we know individuals within that office, so that we can make sure that if that student needs to go somewhere else, that we can help them navigate the next step in that process, so that we're not shuffling the student from office to office trying to get help. The next thing is to remember that what makes sense to us as employees don't always make sense to the student. My daughter registered for a class last week at Eastville College, and I helped her. And it was amazing to be on the other side of that as a parent. And I'll tell you, there were things that looked totally different to me as a parent than they do to me as an employee. So we always have to remember that how we see it as an employee very well could be different than how our students or perhaps our parents see them. The last couple considerations, always be mindful about the how we say something. The word no is no, but sometimes it's just how we convey the word no. As we do that, to be careful about the tone that we use with the person, to remember that no one wants to be talked down to. No one wants to feel that they are being reprimanded. So we have to be careful in terms of how we deliver whatever that final answer is. The other thing that's important that I've learned is that bring a sense of understanding and a sense of clarity to the situation. If there's a no answer that you have to deliver, part of that how in terms of delivering that no can be rooted in giving the student a sense of understanding and clarity around why that answer is no. Sometimes we'll go to that quick response about, well, it's just district policy. That's why we can't do it. Well, for a student, that means absolutely nothing. But if we were to figure out, well, why did the district make that a policy, and be able to convey that, be able to explain that, sometimes the person can be more accepting when they understand, may not always agree, may not always want that to be the final answer, but sometimes they can accept that a little bit better because it does make sense and they can see why that policy is there. And then, of course, the final comment is to be flexible. Find those places where you can make concessions. Sometimes when we have difficult people, we put up that brick wall and we want to give them a quick answer and we want them to move on and to get out of our faces, basically. But find that way to be a little bit more flexible. If that student is standing there and it's something you can help them do, even though you've had to deliver the answer of being no, then be willing to do it. Maybe they need to go to the website and fill out a form because they haven't, and that's why the answer is no. Or maybe help them navigate the website. Help them go to the kiosk and find the web page or the website that they need to go, but be a little bit more flexible and find some easy concessions so that the student will know that you are willing to assist and that you do care and have compassion for their situation.
Dr. Young, so, I felt that all in my bones, right, as you were talking. And sometimes even we're presenting this training, but even us, like we get those personal convictions and are reminded that we need to do things much, much different. And it's not like what this slide said, it's not what you said, but it's how you said it and being mindful of our tone as we're talking to individuals. I so appreciate all of this information that you provided and am reminded about the golden rule. Thank you, Dr. Young. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you as well.
So now we move to, in this particular section, learning ways to respond and not just react. When we react, we are letting our emotions get the best of us. Then the other person immediately becomes defensive. Our ability to gain their trust is then wavered. Responding involves recognizing how you are feeling, but choosing to respond in a way that gets you the outcome you're wanting. And hopefully that's a much more positive outcome. And in talking about responding and reacting, we first must look at a couple of things and developing self-awareness. So emotional awareness or self-awareness is communication. It's often misunderstood. Communication is seldom understood in our today. And all of this is not taught, right, as it relates to self-awareness. The ability to understand our feelings will help you succeed when communicating with others. When you demonstrate respect, as we've talked about throughout this training, and respond with positive intentions, then you naturally become credible and you gain that trust from others. So we want you to pause the conversation. Have the conversation when you are in a non-emotionally charged way, and you can respond in a better way. You have to do that, okay? So this is a two-way street, right? When we're listening to others. We want to listen, but we also want to understand what they need as well. With this shared understanding, there is a better opportunity for you to come to an agreement with the best way to work out something with each other, whatever that might be. Your opportunity for influence at that moment will certainly increase. Just as other people's feelings can affect the message you're trying to send, your own feelings can get in the way. So we want you to consider the feelings of others, as well as your own, when you are in an emotionally charged situation. Pay attention to your emotions and try not to let your emotions get in the way of the message that you are trying to convey. And lastly, recognize misunderstandings. We all know misunderstandings will happen when two people think they're on the same page about whatever it might be. But in reality, they are thinking about things very differently. Misunderstandings happen all the time. But if you are emotionally aware, it can help you navigate a misunderstanding. So I want you to think about this particular scenario. Think of a situation that triggers an emotional reaction in you. I want you guys to start chatting those in if you can. Think about a situation that triggers an emotional reaction in you. And how do you feel in that very moment when you think about that situation? What are you thinking about? As you all think about what I have here, this is very loaded, right? Think about those situations that trigger an emotional reaction from you. Once you know what those things are, it can help you better grasp how to accurately and appropriately deal with them. Now I want you to move to thinking about how you will react to that situation that triggers an emotional reaction. What kind of outcome are you hoping for from this situation? And I do see in the chat box things like when others speak down to me, or when others are condescending. Think about that. If that triggers something emotional in you, right? Think about ways that you will want to respond to that ahead of time so that when that situation happens, you are best able to deal with it in that moment. So as we conclude this presentation today, I want you to understand and think about going forward ways that you can respond differently that may lead to better outcomes. People who understand diplomacy know how to communicate with tact. Pause. Allow yourself some time to have a plan in place before you are emotionally triggered. That way, you can more consistently respond in a way that aligns with your values and intentions. Take the time to understand the situation. We all know at this very moment, there are a lot of things going on in our country. And I want you to be mindful, especially in this particular presentation, about dealing with individuals with diplomacy and tact. Understanding that other people's feelings are real. They are raw. We appreciate those individuals. They're our colleagues, they're our students, they're our community. Be mindful of what you say. Be mindful of how you say it. And be mindful of others' feelings. We all want those positive relationships at work. We want to make an impact on our students. We want to make an impact in this district, and we want to make an impact in our community. Developing all the habits and the traits that we talked about and discussed in this presentation today does not happen overnight. It takes time, and there must be a consistent effort. I want you to go forward and be an agent for positive change. Encourage great relationships. And I want you to think about all the traits, tips that we provided for you today. We thank you so very much for joining us. We hope that you've learned a great deal about diplomacy and tact, and we look forward to seeing you in another presentation in this series, Authentic Care, where we learn a bit more about how to deliver that care. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. See you later.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.